just how Cassie started talking about data as kind of the core fabric, I'll bring the conversation back full circle. And for that, I have like 4 great data leaders over here, visionaries who I've known for a while, and we'd love to unpack. I wouldn't call it the modern data stack. I'll call it the evolving data stack because it's continuously changing. But love to start the conversation with quick intros. Maybe Sol, if you can talk a little bit about your background, and we can go around.
Sure. My name is Rashidi. I'm the former CAO for Estee Lauder. I was the former Chief Data and Analytics Officer for Merck, former CDO for Sony Music, and Chief Data and Cognitive Officer for Royal Caribbean. So I've had the wonderful opportunity to be a part of some Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, and have a lot of scraped knees along the way. I've had great teammates. The opportunity was always to go into an industry that wasn't necessarily tech forward or had strong data literacy and create IP for the company. We walked away with some fantastic patents because we created unique offerings within the space, but not without its ups and downs, that's for sure.
Thanks, Sol. Nachiket, you want to go next?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. I'm Nachiket Mehta. I'm from Wayfair. I'm head of supply chain data and analytics engineering. For those who don't know Wayfair, Wayfair is a marketplace in e-commerce space that connects customers to suppliers, about 22 million active customers to about 20,000 plus suppliers and about 40 million products. And we manage everything in between as our own proprietary supply chain network. Before Wayfair, my background is about 18 plus years experience in data and analytics world. Built a CDP before joining Wayfair. Then I was an investor myself, and we built it, we grew it, and kind of sold it again. I was a co-founder myself and started a food tech company that connected home-based chefs to the foodies who are looking for some different food that they don't find in the restaurant. So, yeah.
Thanks, Venkat. Venkat, go ahead.
Great to be here, everyone. I'm Venkat Varadachary. I spent 20 years at American Express. Last 6 years I was there. 20 years, long time. Seems like no one spent that much time anywhere. 6 years, I was their Chief Data and Analytics Officer, led a large transformation, re-platformed the data infrastructure, moved the company to machine learning across all the different areas, marketing, servicing, and risk management. Spent the last 2 years of my time there doing data monetization with large merchant partners, co-brand partners. Left the company in 2018, spent a year doing some consulting, spent some time with Zeta Ventures, talking to portfolio companies, PE firms. And in 2019, started an AI services company called Zenon. And we work with financial services clients and pharma clients and some large PE firms, helping and enabling AI for all of these companies across the board, really getting things operational. That's about it.
Thanks, Venkat. Chad?
Hey folks, good to see you all. My name is Chad Sanderson. For the past 3 years, I ran the data platform team at a company called Convoy, which was a late-stage freight technology startup. Before that, I was a lead on the artificial intelligence platform team at Microsoft. I created the experimentation platform at companies like Sephora and Subway. Now I'm on my own, I'm doing my own thing. I'm an author, I'm working on a book with O'Reilly called Data Contracts, and I run the largest data quality community on the internet called Data Quality Camp. That's me.
Great, thank you so much. It's great that we're fortunate to have people who work across different flavors of Fortune 500, like different verticals. So maybe the first question is around really understanding the enterprise pain points from a data perspective. So if maybe we can start again with Sol. If you were to take the lens of any of the verticals that you worked in, you worked across retail, finance, a lot of them, healthcare, and so on. Pick any one or any two of them and talk a bit about like what are the top 2 priorities of the data org, especially right now in the market, given the 2 forces in the market. One is the force of ML, which is making the data team make a lot of changes in the market. And the other is the headwinds around growing costs, growing complexity of storing data, centralizing data. So how do you see that change in terms of the priorities for the verticals you worked in?
My father had a great quote. He would say, same sand, different shovel. That's the polite version, by the way. And I think the same applies across the industries that I've served, whether it's travel, entertainment, healthcare, consumer products, and retail. And within travel and leisure, the primary focus back then was all around the consumer journey, the consumer behavior. And do you guys remember the term 360 view of a consumer? We hit fatigued in like 2015, 16, but everyone wanted to understand the consumer profiles. And then it went into, for media and entertainment, around curated content and personalization. And then it went into market access and price point optimization for the healthcare industry. And how do we digitize the clinical trials process? Because it wasn't digitized at the time. And then it's migrated into consumer buying patterns and cohorts and segmentation. And every vertical will have their own flavor and what they determine as value. And that's what I call the offensive playbook. But the thing that's common amongst all of them is the defensive playbook. Data's all over the place across fragmented and disparate system. Decision making is just as fragmented as disparate as their data. They need us to aggregate, curate, govern, all the non-sexy stuff that I call the defensive playbook. And the role of a CDO, even though it's evolved multiple times, is how do you find that balance between the defensive playbook, which is the fundamentals, and the offensive playbook, which is what creates the value? Because you've got to master the basics in order to scale any element or level of innovation. And prior to even joining industry, I was a part of the IBM team. I know we made reference to that, and I helped launch Watson from 2011 to 2014. That was an amazing experience. And if there's anything that taught me, you can't do AI without data. You can't do any of the fun, value-driven use cases without data. But everyone's hit fatigued, and no one's quite really focused on the fundamentals and the basics. And that continues to carry over. And I don't think that's a process you can skip. So even though I want to be very vertical-centric, I think the use cases are very vertically centric, but the premise still exists, and none of that's changed in the past 10 years of being in the C-suite and serving these CDO, CAO positions. You can't negate it or ignore the fundamentals.
Has anything surfaced to the top more recently?
Decision making still continues to stay bifurcated. Mm-hmm. It's very, very difficult to get alignment, to keep the attention of the stakeholders. My running joke is I'll go into any, if I'm running the AI initiative or agenda, define AI. I ask 10 people, I get 102 different answers. It's like asking someone to define governance or MDM. So I think the expectations of the role has changed. And for some reason, I think the part that agitates me the most is they just assume AI is the silver bullet to solve all the data issues, and that just isn't the case.
Although it's the other way around, hopefully. Venkat, what about you? Like you've worked in Amex for 20 plus years. If you were to take a financial services centric lens, what would you say are the top priorities? Are they similar, different? What's changed?
Yeah, I think they're very similar. Even yesterday I was talking to a client, which is a financial services company in Australia, and you're like, I want to move all my data to Snowflake. And I just start with, everybody talks about data and data being important, and it is, and I completely agree that it's the foundation for everything, but not all data is the same. And if you look at modern data stack, and that's why I like evolving data stack, because in the modern data stack, do you treat all your data the same, or do you treat it differently? Looks like all the data is treated exactly the same. And frankly, most of the value is going to come from a very small set of data, and then the rest of it, unfortunately, is not that valuable. But you're still going to store it. You're going to store it for long periods of time. You're going to push it through all your infrastructure. You're going to ramp up your costs. It's going to be very expensive. And because you're looking in a garbage dump, can you even find what you really want to find? And so I think that's going to be the big transition, because for the last 10 years, nothing wrong with the word centralization, but everybody says centralize, 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 but they're saying centralize everything. And I think that's a mistake. And I think we have to rethink how we send data through the systems, how we prioritize the data, and how we create value while keeping the costs low. I think that's also going to speed up a lot of things, because honestly, everything clogging up the arteries of the platform is really the data itself in the end. So how do we kind of solve for that?
Chad, do you have a different opinion coming from a hyperscale freight marketplace, Convoy, which has a lot of tech traits internally? Is that different from enterprise?
I think that the problems that Venkat and Sol pointed out are exactly the same in a scale-up like Convoy. I think the difference is because Convoy is writing software probably at a much faster rate, and that software is likely quite low quality, then we get to the problems and the pain much faster. And that was actually the situation that I arrived in when I was at Convoy. Convoy was cloud native. They adopted the modern data stack earlier than most companies. So that was tools like Fivetran for ETL. We were using CDC, Snowflake. We had an internal machine learning platform that we built ourselves, an experimentation platform that we built ourselves. All of this really amazing infrastructure. We had statisticians and AI researchers that we would hire. And the data that was being used was completely untrustworthy. Nobody trusted the data. There was no communication between the producers of the data and the consumers. No one knew where the data was going, how it was being used, and how critical it was, to Venkat's point. And all of this was effectively spiraling out of control. And when I started talking to other growth stage companies in the space, attempting to understand, is this a local problem to Convoy? Is there something uniquely wrong that we are doing? The answer was not only no, but it was every single company that I talked to had the exact same issue, and they often had the problem orders of magnitude worse than us.
Nachiket, I have a different question for you. Switching gears on, we spoke about one of the tailwinds of ML, and everyone is talking about LLMs and Gen.ai. Let's approach this question of how does Gen.ai change the data stack? Not from a product first perspective, but from a persona first perspective. So if you pick any persona in the data stack, whether it's a data engineer, data analyst, ML engineer, and I'm combining ML and data to a certain extent. And if you were to think of what LLMs could do, could you help us reimagine any one stakeholders' future workflow? What would that look like? A net new workflow, a net new product?
Sure. So I would start with the way I kind of spread this vision internally is think about data producer and data consumer. Everyone fits into one or the other bucket or both, right? And it depends on the use case, which role, which persona you play. Right? So what's critical here is treating data as a product or data products, like Cassie talked about earlier. And what it means is how the data contracts are set up between the producers and consumers. Much like Wayfair as a platform where a customer and supplier are interchanging some products and they expect the ownership and other things to come with it, similar setting where the data product should have an ownership identified. And what happens usually when we put all analysts, data engineers, ML engineers in more often than not the consumer bucket, the trust in the data, like Chad was saying earlier, is lost, right? Like you are showing ROI, bigger ROI, and how things are improving, better conversion rate, better NPS or whatnot. But still, when you are applying Gen AI, there's some hallucination or the fabricated data that exists, and how do you make sure that that doesn't kind of 80-20 rule, 80% of things are working fine, but that 20% kind of messes up with your 80% of the good work that you have done. So I think there is a long way to go to adopt the Gen AI and kind of change the lifestyle of those users. There's this fundamental thing needs to evolve in the evolving data stack per se. But to answer your question, there are ways where data analysts or some non-technical users could ask questions in natural language setting, and they could get the answers faster. They don't need to know the ontology. They don't need to know the data model. They don't need to know where the data is coming from and who is the owner and all that. And when you build that good foundation of knowledge graph and things like that, they can optimize that workflow and their output much better, right? So that's where I see there will be a big change and more effective change. Wherever there are data quality issues, still data engineers or the owners and engineers still need to fix them and make sure they put the right data stack in place.
Makes sense. Venkat, you were smiling. Maybe the same question for you as well.
I think how many years are we looking out? I think that's really the question.
I think you can take as on the horizon.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
right?
we don't have to assume that the models are.
So let's assume it's going to be terrific, right? Let's
Yeah.
just assume everything is going to work in an awesome way in 10 years from now. machine learning scientists and machine learning engineers are going to have a lot of stuff done by AI. And so there's going to be a lot of opportunities for products and new innovation for tools for them. But then what are they going to do with their time, right? And what are the opportunities for tools to help them with what they should be doing with their time that they're not able to do with their time right now? Because right now they spend a lot of time writing code, debugging code, testing, making sure things work. Let's say hallucination is 20%, but 80% of the work gets done. Now they have time to rethink, because everything that they're doing is a process. And if I look at these processes, a lot of times I go into companies and the processes themselves are very inefficient. And all they're asking for is, make my inefficient process a little bit more efficient. And what I tell them is, you actually need to rethink and redesign your entire process. And that's what these people are going to spend time doing, is better understanding of the domain, better understanding of the data, better understanding of what the AI is doing so that they can inform themselves. How do I rethink the process? And what are the tools that are going to help me kind of reimagine different things that I'm doing to make it better, not just more efficient?
The customers that you work with, do they want to do that reimagination themselves, or do they want to work with external vendors to help them?
No, I think talent is always a challenge, right?
Yeah.
So if people have products that help them accelerate, they're very interested in that. And I think, we'll get to this, but it's kind of like, in the end, most people don't want to build themselves. Because you think of a financial services company, they're not trying to be a technology company. They're not trying to be an analytics company. They don't want to build all of this on their own. The reason they build it, and we'll go through all of that, is because the last 20% in a large scale enterprise has a lot of value. So customization comes in, and most products don't custom to fit right now. But with newer technologies, I think that's going to be very different as you kind of think about the future. But that's kind of where people are at. People would rather buy, honestly. They want to focus on the core problem they're solving for their customers. If you're a cruise line or you're a medical devices company, do you really want to be rethinking and building your data stack from scratch? The answer is no, but they do it because they're forced to.
I'll give a very, very specific example. When I was at Sony Music, we were trying to build a social sentiment model. Because when you're determining track performance, it's not just a matter of views and likes and all that other stuff. There's also an element around, social sentiment. Well, sounds simple in concept, but I remember back, 2015 to 18 was when the data science community was no longer restricted to research, but we were trying to create applications to commercialize their skill sets into real-world industry-based problems. And so I had built a data science team, and we were trying to solve several problems. But this was one of them. How do we create a social sentiment tool so that when a track is released, if you guys are on Spotify or Apple every Friday, we can in real time understand how people are reacting to the track? It took us about 6 weeks, and we ultimately never launched because we couldn't keep track with it. But that track is SHIT, is very different than that track is the SHIT, then that track is the SHIT. And so outside of just understanding urban vernacular or the new slang, which we could never keep up with, there was so much contextual translations that we constantly had to build into the models. And as soon as we felt like we were going to crack that nut, new language was entering in. Or we had to do emoji translators. Well, with country music and the genre, cry face does not necessarily mean sad, it means empathetic. So it's actually a positive sentiment. It means that the user who's hearing the music relates to the track. You would have never known this stuff unless you were actually trying to solve the problem of social sentiment problems. We had to build that stuff from scratch. But with modern day LLMs, I don't have to use my data scientist on building that capability, which we ultimately could never launch because we couldn't keep up with the way language was evolving. I could have easily bypassed that whole entire process and just restricted to the data scientist being used for data science as a service, very bespoke, custom-based problems that businesses had, and I could democratize and commercialize these other things that, quite frankly, LLM models can solve for us right now. And so that's like it's an immediate example that came to mind as we're talking about that.
Super helpful. Chad, you and your team have built the entire stack at Convoy. Would you have done anything differently if you built it this year?
If I built it this year, yes, definitely we would have done something differently. I think to Venkat's point and to the point that Sol made, ultimately it really just comes down to what is the gap between the solutions in the market and the use cases that the companies have. We actually built our own machine learning deployment platform even though SageMaker existed. And that's because Convoy had around 25 machine learning models that were deployed into production. And we needed the ability to run constant experiments on those models. And that wasn't a feature that SageMaker had at the time. And so spending 6 to 8 months to build out our own ML deployment system with experimentation on shadow traffic in the loop was actually worth it from a financial perspective to us from that one feature. Now, if that product had existed, even at the seed stage or the Series A stage, we probably would have used them because it was better ROI for us. The system that we actually ended up using at Convoy was if we're doing something that is brand new, that doesn't have a clear precedent, that we're not sure whether or not it's actually going to be able to solve the problem, it's probably better to build the first version ourselves. And that's because since we're talking about infrastructure here, these are very costly mistakes to make. If we decide to implement an infrastructure product that many other teams begin to take dependencies on, our ability to extract that platform becomes extraordinarily difficult. We're talking about an order of months to years and millions of dollars. So being able to build it ourselves and componentize it and very easily switch these platforms in and out if they work was extraordinarily useful for us. The tools that are available today, I never would have built an experimentation platform. I think there's A/B testing tools that are out now that sit natively on top of the data warehouse that are excellent, and I would have used those. We had our own feature flagging platform that we built internally. I think that there's really great tools for that now too. And I think a lot of the machine learning, we built our own feature store. And all of these things now have a pretty common precedent in the market.
Makes sense. And I think that is a great segue into the fact that like you guys have been pitched by so many vendors as current heads of data, as ex-heads of data, and there's so many startups in the audience listening in, and would love to understand from you in your journey of like hearing these pitches, what worked? Like what was your evaluation process? And for the companies that you ended up working with, if you could give examples of what really worked for those companies. Maybe Sol, you could start.
Sifting through the noise is probably one of the hardest things we have to do. You know, and not to throw anyone under the bus, but you can't come forward and say, oh, we have an AI tool or an AI product. I feel like that's just the common day stamp. And every 3-4 years, we have a different stamp. Like it's just the new word. And unfortunately, sometimes when I dig into the details, sales reps are great. I do okay with them. I'm like, but don't show up on your first meeting with just the sales rep, because I'm going to go straight in and I'm going to ask about, it's like, I call it the 5-layer bean dip. I'm going to go in 5 layers deep, and if you don't have the answers for 5 layers deep, make sure you have someone in that call, because I really want to understand things. And half the time you just figure out that it's just a bunch of SQL scripts running a massive decision tree behind the scene, and they're calling that AI, or they're calling certain prediction models AI, and I'm like, when did this become AI? Or it's a linear regression model, and you're like, the burden's on you to do your homework. I think if you're fortunate enough to have a team that have very good BS detector, I'll delegate the responsibility of like filter for us and see what's real. Or individuals that I respect tremendously, like Venkat, I know, like our peer group is really tight. It's not Kevin Bacon's 6 degrees separation. We're 2 degrees at most. So I will pick up the phone and call any one of my peers and go, what was your experience like? Are you a buyer of this? And like, great tool, totally conceited team. Okay, great, good to know. Or the platform's not where it is, but they're forward selling a lot of capabilities, and the team is excellent in solving problems. And I actually use my peer group to give me the 411 when I'm on the fence for certain things. And usually if they go in with, we're an AI company, my headlights go up and I get speculative, and then I start asking the questions only to find out that they're not.
And what you've described is phase 2, right? When you spend time with them, dig into the product. What about phase 0? Like if they were to like just approach you, what's been the most creative way of approaching you as a customer?
I've had 2 sales reps to this day, like in my entire history of purchasing software and platforms and hardware, that have converted to being sales reps to actually personal friends of mine. And the reason being is they didn't come at me selling a solution or a software or a product. They either listened to a talk or they figured out from my teammates what we were trying to solve. And they would either send me articles like, hey, I thought this may be interesting because I know last week, or I heard you've just been talking about this, or I know you're trying to solve this problem and there's some visualization issues. I found this great book. I hope it's helpful for you. Without coming in about selling, they have personally invested themselves into understanding what I'm trying to figure out without asking me, can you tell me what your strategic priorities are? If that's ever asked again, I'm like, here's another 30 minutes of my life that I'm not going to get back. So they figure out what I'm trying to solve by being very resourceful, and then they give me nuggets of information. And when they've given me those 2 or 3 nuggets, it naturally warms up and I lose my defenses, if that makes sense, because we're being pursued a lot, unfortunately. And then that's when the dialogue could happen. And something could go top of mind and go, hey, do you know something about this? I don't, but I know someone who does. That's a selfless act. You're in the mix. You're in the inner circle now. Or actually, I may, but I'm not the best at talking about it. Can we schedule something for 2 weeks and I'll bring actually my architect who can? That to me tells me they're not going to, there's no BS. They're interested in building the relationship and it's not a pure product play.
Thank you for sharing that. Nachiket, you've been a founder yourself, and I got introduced to you through one of our portfolio companies as a customer. So, what made you, how do you decide, and what made you work with that company?
Plus one to solve. I think what the typical sales and a customer relationship is very much like materialistic and pushy, right? Like you just start attracting reverse magnet sort of a relation. But what matters at the end of the day is business decision and what problem you are solving for business. And if you can articulate your business problem in your mind for yourself first, then you can easily ask the right questions to avoid the noise and just get to the point and whether you need a next level conversation or not. The successful tactic that has worked is many times we ask if you have a free or a trial version and things like that, and just get used to it. You can get your team, if obviously the match is there, you kind of get the trial version or a freemium version. Many times they do that. And then prove out the ROI with a very specific project plan saying, okay, this is the expected outcome. Spend minimal time, MVP, and get to the basic and say, okay, it's worth investing more time because not just money, but the time, there's an opportunity cost involved there as well. And let's get to the decision making soon, right? There are other ways like with Wayfair context, right? Like this where I'm not a founder, where we have 3,000 engineers, right? So there are a lot of history of Wayfair is build versus buy, and we are getting out of that. We build where it's our proprietary thing that affects our business model, but not everything has to be built. We built our own clickstream solution, for example. We shoot our own TV advertising, and a lot of those things. Certain things make sense when we are building our proprietary supply chain network and our warehouse management system, transportation management system, but not always. That creates more complication for the data stack, because you are not getting some product out of the box that comes with API integrations to the general evolving data stack. But now you have to look into each and every nuances across your first-party data and make sure that you promote the right ontology, the right governance around it that would match and solve the problem that you're looking for from the tool, right? Many times the tool, the customization is a key feature here. So there are a lot of customization, scaling, support, and all that comes. And total cost of ownership is the last thing, where many times you have to keep that in mind, where at the surface level, that the price of the tool may not be enough, and there are a lot of things that you need to be involved in that.
Venkat, what has been your experience coming from a regulated space?
Well, I was an operator for 20 years, and then I'm running my own services company for the last 5 years, so I do all my own business development and sales. And I think for founders, be persistent. I think that's the number one thing. It's very hard to do business development. And if you haven't done it before and you haven't done it for a long time, you'll realize how hard it is. So be persistent, work through your network, because it's always better to come through a referral, like Saul was saying. So if you know somebody who knows somebody, that's always going to be better. Go unprepared, so understand what are the pain points. Go to more junior folks, especially don't start with senior folks. If you're going to junior folks, it's better because then you can see what is actual pain point on the ground, what can you solve, what's real, and then you can understand what is the value that you're solving for, because if you're not solving for something that's high value, it's going to be really difficult to get a sell. So now if you know the value, you understand the pain point, link your product to the pain point directly. You might have a lot of other features you're super proud of in your product and you've spent a lot of time on those, but this is not to show all the hard work that you've done. You're really going in there to close the sale and get in the door. So if it's a free pilot, go for a free pilot. Any opportunity that you get, go for it. Personally, I do a lot of services engagements that are zero cost, and I get paid completely on performance. So take 20% of the value that we create. We have clean metrics set aside up front. So I'll, whatever it takes to kind of get in the door, build trust, build a relationship, get to know your customer. And like Saul said, once you build that relationship, everything will flow from there because you're really trying to help somebody versus selling something. And I think that's the big difference.
Super helpful. Chad, you've bought a lot of products at Convoy. What made you move in that direction for any of those products?
Yeah, honestly, I think what Venkat said really summarized it up well. When people came to me trying to push a solution, I almost always shut down immediately. I'm not interested in buying solutions. I'm interested in solving problems. The other thing that has always been very effective is when someone didn't sell a point solution, meaning they didn't say, hey, you need a feature store, here's a feature store. You need an analytics tool, here's an analytics tool. They helped lay out the map of my problems, which are all interconnected with each other. I'm having data quality issues. My team is not able to do self-service analytics. I'm missing some piece of observability in the stack. My storage costs are going through the roof. If you can help me form a view of the world and explain how all of those problems are connected and where your particular solution fits in, I'm much more likely to want to adopt not just your product, but also your worldview. When you don't give me that information, I have to construct all of that myself and then figure out where your product sits in this worldview that I now need to build. So people who come to me and help me understand, oh, if you take a step back, you'll notice that the reason you even need a feature store in the first place is because your company has not done a very good job thinking about your data model, and because of that, you have data everywhere, and because of that, you have a lot of replication. So you should start doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that has always been something that's extraordinarily useful for me. The last thing that I think has been really useful is when we start having the initial sales conversation, and they are simply describing the problem that they think that I have. So when they come to me and say, hey, here's the 3 or 4 or 5 problems that our tool solves. Do you have these problems? If you do, can you stack rank them? And if the answer is no, I don't have any of those problems, then we can end the meeting in 5 minutes and go our separate ways. And that's really awesome. It saves me a lot of time. There is nothing worse than sitting through a 45-minute presentation and at the end of it, I say, I don't need this. That's like, I hate you now. But if from the very first moment I say, oh yeah, I have problem 1, 2, and 3, now I want to dig into those a little bit more, and you can show me how your product solves that, I'm hooked and interested from the very beginning.
Well, I hope after this you'll hear from a lot of people reaching out to you with the same tactics that you've told them. But thank you so much for coming here, and I think I've been told that the next session is coming up, so thank you so much.
Thank you.